Hello friends, once again I welcome you on my YouTube channel English with Raswell, and in today's lecture we are going to discuss about the chapter The Portrait of a Lady. This chapter is from Hornbill book of 11th class, CBSE 11th class, The Portrait of a Lady by Khuswant Singh. Before starting the chapter we must know about the author Khuswant Singh. Perhaps you might have heard about Khuswant Singh. Khuswant Singh was an Indian author. He was born in 1915. March 1915 he was born, and he died in Feb 2014. He lived a healthy life of 99 years, and in these 19 years he produced a healthy literature. We are indebted to that person, Khuswant Singh, because of his literary output. He was not a literary person. Besides being a literary person, he was also the editor of newspapers, he was the editor of a magazine, he was the diplomat, he was the member of Rajya Sabha, and he was included in Indian Foreign Service when India got freedom in 1947, and after that he also became a journalist in All India Radio in 1951. But his main literary output came in 1950s, in 1956, when his novel A Train to Pakistan was published, and it became a popular novel of that time, and that was adapted in film in 1980s. He was also given Padam Bhushan in 1974, but he returned it in later on in 1984 when Indian Army laid it Amritsar temple. But that is a different talk. And moreover, he in 2007 he was also awarded Padam Vibhushan. This was I was talking about Khuswant Singh because he produced so many things. He was also completed his LLB from King's College London, and he served there for 7 or 8 years, and after that he came in India. He was all in all, he was everything. Khuswant Singh was everything. Now we will discuss about his lesson, The Portrait of a Lady. Friends, Portrait of a Lady, as you are having, as you see, the portrait is a type of picture. In this chapter we will see a picture of a lady, and that lady is none other than his grandma. That lady is his grandma. His grandma. In this is an extremely interesting story which is based on relationship. This is based on relationship. Or you can say the main theme of this story, The Portrait of a Lady, is relationship. Now let's discuss about story, what happens in this story, The Portrait of a Lady. As you see from the title, lady is the grandma, and in this chapter we have a picture of the grandma who is about 100 years or more than 100 years old. She is a lady of 100 years old, and more interesting fact about her is that for the last 20 years she has been the same. Means the author hasn't observed any kind of change in the lady, in his grandma. She was the same 20 years before, and now when the author is observing, he finds that grandma is the same. Nothing has changed in her. When the lesson starts, in the very first paragraph it has been described that the grandma is about 100 years old. She is a type of short lady. She bends when she walks. She wears white sari. She is a religious type of lady. At the same time, the author's grandpa is also described. And in that descriptions we have a picture that is hanging on the wall, and in that picture grandpa or grandfather is wearing a turban. He is wearing loose fitting clothes, and he has a long white beard that covered most of his chest. and from the observations we can see that he also appears about 100 years or more than 100 years of age. That, and after that what happens, we come to the most important topic, that is relationship. When the story starts, grandma and the author, or you can say Khuswant Singh or his grandma, they are living in village, and author's parents, his mother and father, they are in a city, and they are in the process of settling themselves down in the city. And when they will be well settled there in the city, Khuswant Singh and his grandma will be called there. But by that time they are living in the village, and in the village what they do, they have a daily routine. Author and his grandma, both of them go to the temple school. I'm saying that that was the temple school, because grandma goes there for worship and author goes there to learn alphabets. The priest of the temple teaches them how to read and how to write, and for that purpose grandma prepares earthen pot. He plasters that wooden slate that was available at that time, and they have thick steel chapatis which are thrown to the street dogs by grandma, because grandma was a religious type of lady, and she used to feed the dogs while returning to the home after completing the worship, when when author completes his alphabets or so on. That was the first phase of their relationship. That was in a village, or you can say that the first phase was in the village life. When author's parents are well settled in the city, they are called in a city. Here in the village, he studies religious type of books. He reads Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata, etc. These are the books available in the temple, and these books are taught to the author Khuswant Singh. But grandma is also a religious type of lady, but when he shifts to the city, these religious books are replaced by the science books. Author is taught in the science school, Archimedes principles, world being round, and all these things. But grandma is unable to help the author, because if author asks the questions about Gita, if he asks the questions about the Ramayana, then there is possibility grandma can sort out the problem of that questions. But now in the city schools, when they are well settled, when they are called in the city, then he is going in a city school, and that's in city schools he is taught science books, he is taught Archimedes principles, world being round, and like this he is also taught music. But according to grandma, music has a loved associations. She always thinks that music has a special fascinations for beggars or prostitutes and like this. So when she is learnt that author is given the music lessons, she is shocked. And a common link of friendship is not snapped, but somehow she got disturbed because of this disturbance of science school and scientific books, because she is unable to help. When they were in the village, she used to accompany him up to the school, but when he is in a city schools, now what happens, a bus comes there and he is carried in a bus, so she doesn't accompany him. When they were in the village, she used to feed the dogs, but when they are in city now, she starts feeding the sparrows, because there are no dogs in the city, and that's why sparrows have taken the place of the dogs. And now in the city, she spends most of her time in spinning the wheels. That was the second phase of their relationship. In the third phase, author is admitted in a university, and he is given a separate room, and in that separate room he starts his study. And this time the common link of friendship is somehow snapped, because he is no longer with her, and she spent most of her time alone, and now she has become habitual of this loneliness. She spends most of her time in spinning the wheels and etc. She spent her time while feeding the sparrows. That is an interesting chapter of feeding the sparrows. Sparrows come there, and they sometimes sit on her head. Sometimes they sit on her body and other parts, but she never shooks them away. That was an interesting fact. When he is in university, and after that, what happens? He goes abroad to study, but in that process he thinks that when he is going to study abroad, perhaps when he will return home, grandma will be no more. Because of her age, it appears that grandma will die when he will return after 5 or 6 years after completing his studies. But most interestingly, or fortunately, we can say that when he returns home, he finds that grandma is there to receive him. When he goes there, she bids him adieu, but when he comes there, she also goes there to receive the author at the station. And when author comes after completing his study in foreign countries, she sings the song of the homecoming of warriors. She takes a dilapidated drum and starts beating it, and she gathered all the women of the households and of their neighborhood, and she becomes a little bit tired or exhausted. At that moment, she says that now this is the first time I have forgot to pray, and now she doesn't want to spend even a single second in gossiping, and she doesn't want to, even the author has come, she doesn't want to talk to the author at this moment, and she starts praying. But after some times, they see that author's grandma was ill, and sometimes he observes that the rosary has fallen down from her hand, and she has closed her eyes forever, and she has died. At that moment, what happens? This is the most interesting scene of the chapter. When her dead body is to be carried out for the funeral processions, but before the funeral procession, they have to make so many arrangements, and that's why she is laid there in the veranda. And in that portions, hundreds and thousands of sparrows come there. They didn't want to eat even a single piece of the bread, because author's mother threw some crumbs in front of the sparrows, and she thinks that perhaps they have come here because they are hungry, and if she throws some crumbs of the beds, then after eating they will fly away. But interestingly, they didn't fly, and they didn't eat even a single crumb, and they sit there. Or you can say that generally what happens, they, whenever grandma used to feed the sparrows, they make a chirping, they make a bedlam of the whole house. But at that moment, they were not chirping. They were, or in other words, we can say they were in a silent mourning. They were in a silent mourning. That was the scene. But when author's grandma's dead body is carried away, all these sparrows flew away silently, and that was a really shocking scene. And we can say that even these birds and animals have thinking, they have emotions, and we should think about their emotions, and we should think about these mute animals or the birds, which are very deeply, you can say, involved in us somehow. That's the lesson as far as title is concerned of the lesson. The portrait of the lady. Portrait is the picture, and picture, in the whole portion of this chapter there is a picture of the grandma. That is the title. So we can see that the title of the lesson is appropriate as far as theme is concerned. A type of relationship they are living in. In part of relationship, you can say that in present scenario, what is happening, because of the generation gap, there is no understanding between grandma and the grandchild. But In this chapter we see that both are living in a healthy relationship, even in the city, although because of some circumstances they are separated, because their relationship remains intact up to the last chapter. So we can learn that such kind of relationships should be there among a child, among between a mother, between a grandmother and a child, and we should follow such kind of relationship. We shouldn't think about the generation gap. Because of the generation gap nowadays, what is happening, child is not understanding his grandpa, child is not understanding even his parents. So in such kind of situation, such kind portrait of a lady like lessons will teach us that our relationship should be intact, come what may. That was the story of the lessons, and generally the questions are based on three phases. I have told the summary of this chapter, and you, on the basis of that summary, perhaps you can sort out all the questions. Thank you.